Journal of a Voyage from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, performed in the year 1808, by Simon Fraser. In April of 1806, Northwest Company explorer Simon Fraser followed Sir Alexander Mackenzie's route west across the Rocky Mountains via the Peace River. That spring and summer he explored the Peace, Parsnip, Nechako, and Stewart rivers of northern British Columbia, establishing Rocky Mountain Portage House, Trout Lake Post, or Fort McLeod, Stewart Lake Post, or Fort St. James, Fort Fraser, and Fort George, known today as Prince George. He dubbed this region west of the Rocky Mountains New Caledonia, likening it to his mother's descriptions of the Scottish Highlands, and chronicled his attempts to establish a Northwest Company foothold there in his first journal. In 1808, Fraser explored the river that would come to bear his name. At the time, the Fraser River was suspected to be the Columbia River, the mouth of which had been discovered less than 20 years earlier by pioneering American maritime fur traders. In this journal, which was first edited for print in 1960 by W. K. Lamb, Simon Fraser chronicles his epic voyage down the Fraser River. Chapter 1. Fort George to the Thompson River. Saturday, May 28, 1808. Having made every necessary preparation for a long voyage, we embarked at 5 o'clock a.m. in 4 canoes at Fraser's River, i.e. at the mouth of the Nechako River. Our crew consisted of 19 men, 2 Indians, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Quesnel, and myself, in all 24. At this place, the Columbia, i.e. the Fraser River, is about 300 yards wide. It overflows its banks and has a very strong current. After having proceeded 18 miles, we came to a strong rapid, the Fort George Canyon, which we ran down. One of the canoes came near striking against a precipice which forms the right bank. A little lower down the channel, it contracts to about 70 yards and passes between 2 rocks. After running down several considerable rapids, we put ashore at 1:1 a.m. to breakfast. In the meantime, Mr. Stewart took a meridian altitude, OLL 115 degrees 9 feet 45 inches by artificial horizon. Error of sextant 7 feet 30 inches plus. We saw many fresh tracks of red deer. Re-embarked at 1. Fine going. A smooth current interspersed with small islands, several houses and tombs along the left bank. At 4 p.m. we passed a river, the West Road River, on right 80 yards wide, and named it Bourbonneur. Here we saw 2 houses, which our Indians called the summer residence of a Nazcotan chief. We landed and left marks to let the natives know that we had passed. Continued our route and encamped at 6, put our arms in order, gave ammunition to all hands, and established a regular watch. We gathered some wild onions for sauce. Sunday, May 29th. Cold morning. We were underway at 4. Went ashore upon an island and secured a bale of salmon for our return. A little lower down the river contracts into a narrow space, the Cottonwood Canyon, and passes violently between high rocks. The canoes, however, being lightened, were run down. Here we put 3 bales of salmon into cache and carried the rest over a portage through a very rugged country. It was late before we had cleared this obstacle. We called this place Décharge de la Montagne. Continuing with a strong current in our favor, we passed a small river, the Cottonwood, on our left. Its banks are high, composed of clay and sand, and there is a house near the entrance. Soon after we came to another river, the Quesnel, and we encamped at sunset. This afternoon we observed several houses of the Nazcotans. They had a very fine prospect consisting of extensive plains and behind hills rising upon hills. The trees in this quarter are pine, cypress, birch, hemlock, cedar, juniper, etc. At night flashes of lightning were to be seen, and loud peals of thunder to be heard, accompanied with heavy rain. Monday, May 30th. We embarked at 5 a.m., experienced a strong current. The country all along is charming and apparently well inhabited, having seen a large number of houses. At 6 we put to shore at a large house, found a cache of fish. After taking a few salmons and leaving the value, we secured the rest for the owners. Observed some vestiges of horses at this place. A little below, we put ashore again, and left a bale of salmon in cache. This caused some delay, past several rapids, in the afternoon. This country, which is interspersed with meadows and hills, dales and high rocks, has upon the whole a romantic but pleasant appearance. Continuing our course expeditiously, on a sudden we perceived some of the natives on the left shore, seemingly in great confusion. We crossed to the right and landed at a large house. Our Indians then called out to the strangers on the opposite shore, informing them that we were white people going to the sea. A woman of the Atna nation who happened to be within hearing on our side of the water came running towards us, speaking as loud as possible, but our interpreter could not understand her. Yet she still continued speaking, and endeavored to supply the deficiency by signs. In this manner she continued, at one time addressing the people on the other side, at another directing her discourse to us. In the meantime, we crossed the river. But we were still on the water when some couriers were dispatched on horseback with the news of our arrival to the next Indians, and we only found a man and a woman with 3 children of the Atna nation at the encampment. These were alarmed at our strange appearance. We found a young boy whose mother was of a Tautan nation, who understood a little of the carrier language. By his means we learned that in consequence of the couriers just now sent off, many of the natives would make their appearance in that day, and that it would be dangerous for us to proceed before our intentions were publicly known. This information, added to the desire of procuring guides, induced me to remain the rest of the day. In the afternoon, some Tautans and Atnas arrived on horseback. They seemed peaceably inclined, and appeared happy to see us, and observed that having heard by their neighbors that white people were to visit their country this season, they had remained near the route on purpose to receive us. According to the accounts we received here, the river below was but a succession of falls and cascades, which we should find impossible to pass, not only through the badness of the channel, but also through the badness of the surrounding country, which was rugged and mountainous. Their opinion, therefore, was that we should discontinue our voyage and remain with them. I remarked that our determination of going on was fixed. They then informed us that at the next camp the great chief of the Atna had a slave who had been to the sea, who perhaps we might procure as guide. These Indians had heard of firearms, but had never seen any. Seeing our firearms, they desired us to explain the manner in which they were used. In compliance, we fired several shots, the report of which astonished them to that degree as to make them drop off their legs. Upon recovering from their surprise, we made them examine the effect. Seeing the marks on the trees, they appeared uneasy, and observed that the Indians in that quarter were good and peaceable people, and would never make use of their arms to annoy white people. Yet they remarked that we ought to be on our guard, and act with great caution when we approached villages, for should we surprise the natives, they would be apt to mistake us for enemies, and through fear attack us with their arrows. During the above-mentioned experiment in firing, we lost our swivel. It had a flaw before, and firing at this time, perhaps with an overcharge, it broke into pieces and wounded our gunner. This accident alarmed the Indians, but having convinced them that the injury was of no great consequence, they were reconciled. The Atna language has no affinity to any other that I know, and it was by the means of 2 different interpreters that we were enabled to understand it. The men of this tribe are of a diminutive size, but of an active appearance. They dress in skins prepared in the hair. Their weapons are bows and arrows neatly finished. The country round consists of plains well stocked with animals. Some of our men who were out hunting saw plenty of deer. Tuesday, May 31st. After dressing the gunner's wound and examining the state of our firearms, we embarked at 5, accompanied by one of the Taotan Indians as an interpreter for the Atna language. Aided by several rapids and a continual strong current, we soon performed the distance of 12 miles and arrived at a carrying place, the canyon below Soda Creek. Here the canoes, being lightened of a half of their lading, were run down. The other half of the lading was carried over by land for 2 miles through a very uneven country. The chief and the Indians, recommended to our attention yesterday, who were encamped on a hill to the left, soon joined us and presented us with dried salmon and different kinds of roots. The last, though considered as excellent by the natives, we could not very well relish. After inquiring repeatedly for the slave, who had a knowledge of the country below, he was at last introduced, and to form an estimate of his capacity, I had 2 oilcloths spread out for the ground of a chart, upon which I desired him to sketch the country towards the sea. This he readily undertook, but his endeavours soon convinced me that his stock of knowledge was very slender indeed, for his lines were entirely directed by an elderly man, a relative of the chief. However, in his sketch we could plainly see a confirmation of the badness of the navigation, and thereby the necessity of leaving our canoes and as much of our baggage as we could spare in order to prosecute our journey by land. The chief, who had been an advocate in our cause, spoke much in our favour to his own people, and assured us that the next nation were good Indians and would be kind to white strangers. Having given to our new friend a hint that trading posts should be established in his country within a short period, he immediately offered to accompany us all the way, remarking at the same time that he was well known, and that his experience and influence would be of great consequence to the security of our success. Then his brother presented me with a fine beaver skin and a well-dressed deer skin, and then recommended the chief to our particular protection. I thanked him for his presence, and assured him that every attention should be paid to his relation, and that he should be handsomely rewarded for his trouble on our return. When this ceremony was over, the chief, his slave, and our Taotan interpreter, having got ready, took their departure. But the last was unwilling to proceed, alleging for an excuse that his wife and children would starve in his absence. But notwithstanding this strong argument, he was prevailed upon to proceed. At the lower end of the carrying place, we met 18 men who had come to see us. I shook hands with them. They surveyed us narrowly, but were friendly inclined. This tribe is extremely fond of smoking, and were very troublesome, constantly plaguing us for our pipes. They make use of, in lieu of tobacco, a kind of weed mixed with fat. The chief showed us a calumet which had found its way from the lower parts of the river, left 4 bales of salmon in charge of the chief's brother. We embarked and proceeded down a strong current through many bad places, until late in the afternoon, when we came to a very long rapid which, upon visiting, we found to be strong and dangerous. It being nearly night, we encamped, blowing a hurricane from the south the whole afternoon, which rendered our progress slow, tedious, and often dangerous. At times our canoes were not manageable, and within an ace of being dashed to pieces against the rocks, or of filling. While we were visiting the rapids, we observed some Indians on the opposite side of the river, but they did not observe us. I inquired of the chief if the Indians were in the habit of running down this rapid. He said no. He conceived that the whirlpools would swallow up or overpower any canoes or exertions of his nation, but he added his confidence in our superiority over them was such that he would not hesitate a moment to accompany us wherever we thought proper to venture. Apprehensive that the old man might regret his undertaking and give us the slip in course of the night, I had his bed made in my tent by way of security. Before he went to rest, he recommended to me to have all our guns and pistoles in good order in case of surprise from enemies. Though the Indians, continued he, are generally good people, still there may be bad men among them who will go about in the dark. Wednesday, June 1st. This morning at an early hour all hands were ready, and the natives began to appear from every quarter in numbers. Mr. Stewart, 6 men and myself went again to visit the rapid. We found it about 2 miles in length, with high and steep banks, which contracted the channel in many places to the breadth of 40 or 50 yards. The immense body of water passing through this narrow space in a turbulent manner, forming numerous gulfs and cascades, and making a tremendous noise, had an awful and forbidding appearance. Nevertheless, since it was considered as next to impossible to carry the canoes across the land on account of the height and steepness of the hills, it was resolved to venture them down this dangerous pass. Leaving Mr. Stewart and 2 men at the lower end of the rapid, in order to watch the motions of the natives, I returned with the other 4 men to the camp. Immediately upon my arrival, I ordered the best 5 men out of the crews into a canoe lightly loaded. This order was no sooner given than obeyed, and the canoe in a moment was under way. After passing the first cascade, the canoe lost her course, and was drawn to the eddy, where it was whirled about for a considerable time, and seemingly in suspense whether to sink or to swim. The men had no power over her. However, it took a favorable turn, and by degrees was led from this dangerous vortex again into the stream. It then continued flying from one danger to another until the cascade near the last, where in spite of every effort the whirlpools forced it against a projecting rock, which happened to be a low point. Upon this the men debarked and saved their own lives, and contrived to save the property. For the greatest danger was still ahead. Of course, to continue on the water would be certain destruction. During this distressing scene we were on shore, looking on, anxiously concerned, and seeing our poor fellows once more safe, gave us as much happiness as to themselves. We hastened to their assistance, but their situation rendered our approach perilous and difficult. The bank was extremely high and steep, and we had to plunge our daggers at intervals into the ground to check our speed, as otherwise we might be impelled to slide into the river. When we joined the party we lost no time, but set to work immediately. We cut steps into the declivity of the hill, fastened a line to the front of the canoe with which some of the men ascended in order to haul it up, while the others supported the canoe upon their arms. In this manner our situation was extremely precarious. Our lives hung, as it were, upon a thread, for failure of the line or a false step of one of the men might have hurled the whole of us into eternity. However, we fortunately cleared the bank before dark. The men who had the rest of the baggage in charge, perceiving from these difficulties the impossibility of attempting the rapid with safety, began to carry it, and had immense high hills to ascend with heavy loads on their backs. Numbers of the natives came to see us in the course of the day and remained. They all assured us that the navigation for a certain distance below was impracticable, and advised us to leave our canoes in their charge and proceed on our journey by land to a great river, i.e., the Thompson, that flows from the left into this communication. The country, they said, consisted of plains, and the journey could be performed with horses in 4 or 5 days. Thence we should have smooth water all the way to the sea. But going to the sea by an indirect way was not the object of the undertaking. I therefore would not deviate, and continued our route according to my original intention. The Indians seemed pleased in our company. They carry no arms, and this confidence, I suppose, was meant as a testimony of their friendship. There is a tribe of carriers among them who inhabit the banks of a large river to the right. They call themselves Chilcotins. About 60 Indians were present on this occasion, and as many more were on the opposite side bawling to us to send for them. But as their presence could be of no service to us, we thought it more suitable to dispense with their company as much as possible. Thursday, June 2nd. The river had risen 8 feet within these 24 hours. More Indians arrived. All hands hard at work carrying the baggage, and with the assistance of the Indians and of a line, 2 of the canoes were hauled up the hill. Seeing the difficulty attending this experiment, we came to the determination of leaving the other canoes and provisions. Mr. Stewart and some of the men agreed to go by land, but on application to the Indians for the horses they had promised, we received evasive answers, and we passed the rest of the day in anxious suspense. Friday, June 3rd. The Indians having deceived me, I was under the necessity of deranging my plans of yesterday, and this morning had 1 more of the canoes taken up the hill, so that all the party may continue by water. We only could procure 4 horses. These were of service in the carrying place, where the road is excessively bad, being up and down hill, and sometimes along the edge of dangerous declivities, over one of which a horse with Mr. Stewart's desk and our medicine chest tumbled, and some papers and medicines were lost. The canoes and the other articles which remained I gave in charge to an Indian who, we were assured, was an honest, good man. The Indians made us understand that within a couple of days more we should come to a plentiful country where the Indians were hospitable. But having by this time acquired sufficient acquaintance with the character of our new councillors, we did as we were done by. We gave them civil but evasive answers, and in all followed the dictates of our own judgment. This is called the Atnah nation. Their country is well stocked with large animals, and they consequently pay very little attention to fishing. In summer they reside in shades, and their winter quarters, which are built underground, are square below, diminishing gradually in size to the top, where there is a small aperture which serves the double purpose of door and chimney, while a post with notches answers for a pair of stairs. The Atnahs wish to be friendly to strangers, but they do not know how. The men are tall and slender, of a serious disposition and inclined to industry. They say they never sing nor dance, but we observed them play at hazard, a gambling game well known among the Indians of Athabasca. They besmear their bodies with oil and red earth, and paint their faces in different colors. Their dress is leather. They are great travelers, have been at war beyond the mountains, going by the name of Rocky Mountains, where they saw buffaloes. For seeing our powder horns, they knew them to be of that animal. They informed us that white people had lately passed down the first large river to the left. These we supposed to be some of our friends from the department of Fort des Prairies. Saturday, June 4th. It was late morning before we got ready. Last night an Indian, who seemed to be well acquainted with the river, promised to accompany us, but this morning declined, saying he was afraid of the rapids. One of the Indians brought us a pistol which Mr. Quesnel lost yesterday when he was on horseback. This was a piece of honesty we did not expect. Yet all the time we have been at this place, though many things were left loose and scattered in such a manner as to afford the natives plenty of opportunities, nothing went astray. The Atnahs, therefore, are more honest than any other tribe on this side of the mountains. These Indians, we remarked, don't burn the dead, but bury them in large tombs, which are of a conical form, about 20 feet in diameter, and composed of coarse timber. At 6 a.m. we were on the water and crossed to the Indians, who were on the opposite sides. Here we observed a precipice of immense height ahead, which seemed to bar the river. Continued our course with a strong current, ran down several rapids, and came to a dangerous one, in which the canoes, having shipped much water and being nearly upset, we landed. Visited the lower part of the rapid. Having found it strong and full of tremendous whirlpools, we were greatly at a loss how to act. However, the nature of our situation left us no choice, for we were under the necessity either to run down the canoes or to abandon them. The first having been preferred, they were unloaded and then manned with 5 men each. One canoe went first, and having succeeded, the other 2 immediately followed. The struggle which the men on this trial experienced between the whirlpools and rocks almost exhausted their strength. The canoes were in perpetual danger of sinking or being broken to pieces. It was a desperate undertaking. After escaping this danger, the men returned by land for the baggage. This task was as difficult and dangerous as going by the water, the men being obliged to pass on a declivity which formed the brink of a huge precipice among loose stones and gravel that constantly gave way from under their feet. One of them, who had lost the path of the others, got into a most intricate and perilous situation. With a large package on his back, he got so engaged among the rocks that he could neither move forward nor backward, nor yet unload himself without imminent danger. Seeing the poor fellow in this predicament, I crawled to his assistance, but not without great risk, and saved him. However, his load dropped off his back over the precipice into the river. This carrying place, which is 2 miles long, ruined our shoes, and our feet became full of blisters and were very sore with much walking. Sunday, June 5th. Fine weather. In the night the water lowered about 2 feet. This was an agreeable circumstance. We were off at 5. Good going, a strong current, and many rapids in our favor. At 9 we landed at the head of a dangerous place. The river here, which does not exceed 30 yards in breadth, passes between 2 precipices and is turbulent, noisy, and awful to behold. The carrying place is about a mile long, the ground rough, but there is a beaten path. However, the men took 5 horses to transport the baggage across, yet were much harassed with fatigue. At this place we found a horn of the Sassian, or Rocky Mountain ram. We called this Portage du Baril, set out, and about 2 miles below passed a small river, the Chilcotin, on the right. The same upon which the carriers we saw the other day live. It runs through a fine country abounding with plenty of animals such as moose, red deer, caribou, beaver, etc. The natives make use of horses. Soon after we came to a rapid which, appearing turbulent, we visited. We then lightened the canoes and run them down the rapid. We experienced great danger. One of the canoes was sucked into a whirlpool whose force twisted off the stern. But this happening near the bank and the end of the rapid, the men were saved, while the canoe was dragged on shore full of water. The carrying place was along the side of a steep high hill and very bad. The country altogether looks wild. The rest of the day we had a great run, a strong current, and many rapids, some of them dangerous. We encamped at 7 p.m. Monday, June 6th. Early this morning I dispatched 2 men to examine the river, but they could not go far. The high hills, the precipices, the difficulty attending ravines, etc., rendered walking very painful and disagreeable. A pair of shoes does not last a day, and the men have their feet full of thorns. Embarked at 7, passed on with great velocity, observed many shades for fishing at the rapids. At 10 arrived at the falls. Here the old chief informed us that we should be under the necessity of leaving our canoes. We examined the rapids and found them impracticable. Cascades and whirlpools hemmed in by huge rocks afford but a dreary prospect to our anxiety. I sent Mr. Quesnel and 6 men to examine both sides of the river for a carrying place. After an absence of 3 hours, a carrying place. After an absence of 3 hours, they returned and informed me that there was a well-beaten track on the opposite side, which was about 4 miles long, and passed through a wild country. We crossed over and held a consultation, where it was determined to examine again the river before the canoes should be carried. Mr. Quesnel and Mr. Stewart were ordered upon this service for next morning, and we encamped. Some of the men who had been out a-hunting saw some animals and wounded one. Tuesday, June 7th. Fine weather. This morning, according to our plan of yesterday, the 2 gentlemen, accompanied by 6 men, one of our Indians, the interpreter, and the old chief, set out to examine the state of the river. The men who remained were busy repairing their things. The mountains in sight are very high and covered with snow. Our guide says that they are the highest on the communication. The trees here are poplars and pines. In the evening, cloudy weather with strong wind, followed with small rain. Wednesday, June 8th, fine weather. Excessive heat all day. Examined our salmon, being our only provisions, and discovered we had not enough for a month. However, the Indians say that we shall find plenty from the natives along the route. About 3 p.m., our party, abating less the chief and the interpreter, returned. They had been at the Rapide Couvert, distant about 18 miles, and saw but one bad rapid on the way. Going, they kept near the river and had great difficulty, but on their return they kept on the top of the hills and had agreeable walking. They saw a band of Indians, with whom our Indians remained for our arrival. About 6, put our canoes in the waiter and conducted them with the line down to the first Cascades. The others were run down, though not without danger. Fortunately, the water had recently fallen several feet, otherwise we could never have ventured upon these rapids. After 2 hours paddling down a strong current, we encamped. Thursday, June 9. This morning the men put on their best clothes, our 2 Indians having only a beaver robe and an original skin. I gave each a blanket and a braillettes. All this was done that we might appear to advantage in the eyes of the new Indians, whom we were to find at the Rapide Couvert. At 7 a.m., our arms and everything being in due order, we embarked, and a few hours after arrived at Rapide Couvert. Here the channel contracts to about 40 yards, and is enclosed by 2 precipices of great height, which, bending towards each other, make it narrower above than below. The water which rolls down this extraordinary passage in tumultuous waves, and with great velocity, had a tremendous appearance. It being absolutely impossible to carry the canoes by land, yet sooner than to abandon them, all hands without hesitation embarked, as it were a corps perdu upon the mercy of the Stygian tide. Once engaged, the die was cast, and the great difficulty consisted in keeping the canoes in the medium, or fil d'eau, that is to say, clear of the precipice on one side, and of the gulfs formed by the waves on the other. However, thus skimming along like lightning, the crews, cool and determined, followed each other in awful silence. And when we arrived at the end, we stood gazing on our narrow escape from perdition. After breathing a little, we continued our course to a point where the Indians were encamped. Here we were happy to find our old friends, the chief and the interpreter, who immediately joined our party. The Indians of this place drew a chart of the riverbed, which to our view represented it as a dreadful chain of difficulties, apparently unsurmountable, and they blamed us for venturing so far with our canoes, and for not going by land as advised by the old chief on a former occasion, asserting this communication both by land and by water will in some places be found impracticable to strangers, as we shall have to ascend and descend mountains and precipices by means of rope ladders, etc. Here Mr. Stewart had a meridian altitude of OLL, 412 degrees, 58 feet, 30 inches artificial horizon. I prevailed upon another Indian to embark with us as pilot. We then continued our course until late in the evening, when our pilot ordered us ashore for the night. This afternoon the rapids were very bad. 2 in particular were worse, if possible, than any we had hitherto met with, being a continual series of cascades, mixed with rocky fragments and bound by precipices and mountains that seemed at times to have no end. I scarcely ever saw anything so dreary, and seldom so dangerous in any country, and at present, while I am writing this, whatever way I turn, mountains upon mountains, whose summits are covered with eternal snows, close the gloomy scene. Our 2 Atnas and the Tauten Indians intimated a wish of going ahead to the next nation, which they call the Asketais. The distance, they say, is not more than 25 miles, or the same from here as the Rapide Couvert. I told them we should decide upon the point tomorrow, when we would have more knowledge of our situation. The weather was very hot today and yesterday, The water, as appears by its highest mark, has lowered 10 feet. Friday, June 10th. This morning sent 2 men to examine the water. At 10 they returned and confirmed the report of the natives that the river was impracticable. In consequence, we immediately set to work, erected a scaffold for the canoes where we placed them under a shade of branches to screen the gum from the sun, and such other articles as we could not carry along we buried in the ground. This was done in the presence of the Indians. Saturday, June 11th. This morning we made a second cache of such articles as we should absolutely require upon our return. This was done unknown to the natives, for our acquaintance with them was too slight to merit implicit confidence. By 5 a.m. all was ready, and each took charge of his own package, weighing each about 80 lebs of indispensable necessaries. The old chief assured us that we could not suffer for want among the Asketis, and that we should be there in a couple of nights. The men, hearing this, believed it, thought it a hardship to carry an overplus of provisions, and therefore insisted upon leaving part of their charge. But to this I could not with propriety consent, and we started. The path which we followed was along the declivity of mountains, across many ravines, and we experienced a good deal of fatigue and disagreeable walking. Yet, generally speaking, we were much better off than we had reason to expect. At sunset we encamped on the side of a small river. Mr. Stewart and myself, still indulging the fond hopes of discovering an opening for making use of canoes, went to visit the big river, which we found, as we were taught to expect, impassable. The channel was deep, cut through rocks of immense height, and forming eddies and gulfs, which it was impossible for canoes even to approach with safety. Sunday, June 12th. Fine weather, but hot. We passed several long and steep hills this morning. In some parts the road was through a level country, but generally full of pointed stones, which annoyed our feet greatly. Here and there a few green spots were observed, but few or no trees. About 10 a.m., being tired and thirsty, we stopped near a rock, which, from the brushwood at the foot of it, indicated the vicinity of water. Entering this thicket, we observed a substance something like borax, which had a saline or sulphurous taste. A hole was soon dug, which filled up slowly with this nauseous liquid, some of which, however, we drank. All at once, and when we least expected a surprise, 7 Asketis presented themselves before us with their bows and arrows in readiness for attack. They conceived us to be enemies, but upon coming nearer they discovered from our appearance and demeanour their mistake, laid by their weapons, joined us, and we shook hands. However, we could not understand them. Our interpreter was ahead, but they accompanied us until we had overtaken him. He spoke to them, and they went away, promising to return with provisions in the evening to our encampment. We went on and encamped about sunset. Some of the men were displeased at our going so late, being much fatigued, for the road was extremely bad all the afternoon. Soon after, our new friends, accompanied by our old chief, who had gone ahead to the lodges of these people, joined us and brought different kinds of roots, wild onions formed into syrup, excellent dried salmon, and some berries. Also a few beaver skins, which were of a reddish color. These Indians say that the sea is about 10 nights from their village. One of the old men, a very talkative fellow, and we understand a great warrior, had been at the sea. He saw great canoes and white men there. He observed that the chiefs of the white men were well dressed and very proud, for, continued he, getting up and clapping his 2 hands upon his hips, then strutting about with an air of consequence. This the way they go. Monday, June 13th. This morning lost some time in mending our shoes, fired several shots to show the natives the effect of our guns. We set out at 5, accompanied by all the Indians and 2 horses. Soon after 3 more horsemen joined our party. I asked for one of the horses in order to carry part of our baggage. This the owners declined, and left us. Yesterday our guides carried our bundles. but today they excused themselves, saying they were too tired. Encamped at a considerable river, i.e. the Bridge River, which flows from the right, and which we called Shaw's River. Here we expected to find a band of the natives, but we were disappointed. Alarmed at our approach, they took to their heels. Some of the others went in search of them. The country through which we passed this day was the most savage that can be imagined, yet we were always in a beaten path and always in sight of the river, which, however, we could not approach, its iron-bound banks having a very forbidding appearance. Tuesday, June 14th. The Indians, who went to look out for those who had run away, returned and informed us that the fugitives were waiting for our arrival at the next forks. Last night, some of the natives, having remarked that we were not white men but enemies in disguise, displeased our old chief, and a serious altercation took place in consequence. They stated that this tribe were their natural enemies, and that some of his young men had made war upon them in the spring. This he readily admitted, but affirmed that these were foolish young men who had escaped without his knowledge. Seeing the debate getting high, we interposed, and the argument immediately ended amicably. Then the old chief sent couriers to inform the natives ahead that we were not enemies, and to tell them not to be alarmed at our appearance, and to meet us without arms. At the same time, he strongly recommended to us to be on our guard. Having shaved and dressed in our best apparel, we resumed our march, followed by our retinue of yesterday, but recruiting as we went. Halting a little, a stranger, taking up our interpreter's gun and examining it through curiosity, touched the trigger, which one of our men, observing just in time, threw up the muzzle as the shot was going off. He thus saved the lives of some natives who otherwise would have received the contents. Such a misfortune would have at once put an end to our journey, if not to our lives. When we came to the forks, i.e. where the Seaton River enters the Fraser, the chief men, dressed in their coats of mail, advanced to meet us, in order to know our disposition before we could be admitted into their camp. Our chief harangued them in his language, they answered him in theirs, and we were obliged to employ 3 different interpreters on the occasion to settle the business. These ambassadors are of the Asketi nation. They looked manly, and had really the appearance of warriors. They seemed to speak with fluency, and all was attention marked with signs of applause. Our chief conveyed our sentiments with great animation. He assured the Asketi nation that we were good people, and had nothing to do with the quarrels of Indian nations. When the conference was over, the ambassadors returned to their camp, running as fast as their legs could carry them. We immediately followed, and encamped on the right bank opposite the village, being the best position we could find for a defense. The natives, without loss of time, began to cross over in wooden canoes, and I had to shake hands with at least 137 men, while the old chief was haranguing them about our good qualities, wishing to persuade some of them to accompany us part of the journey, to which several did assent. In the meantime, Mr. Stewart and myself spared no pains to impress upon their minds the numberless advantages which all the nations in that quarter would derive from an open communication with the white people. The Indians brought us plenty of fish, roots, and berries. The mountains are still high and covered with snow. The River, we had the pleasure to understand, is navigable from this place. Wednesday, June 15th. Bad weather this morning, and we indulged ourselves longer than usual in bed. The watch having gone to rest at daylight, the other did not pay due attention, and soon after we had the mortification to miss the old chief, his countryman the pilot, and our Tautan interpreter. These useful men had insinuated more than once their intention of leaving us, being afraid to continue. They behaved well, and I have reason to regret they did not give me an opportunity of paying them for their services. But I hope to meet them again on our return. Here we are, in a strange country, surrounded with dangers and difficulties, among numberless tribes of savages who never saw the face of a white man. Our situation is critical and highly unpleasant. However, we shall endeavor to make the best of it. What cannot be cured must be endured. Some of the Indians who had joined us yesterday forenoon, and whom we were happy to acknowledge now as old acquaintance, drew at my request a chart of the country below this to the sea. By this sketch, the navigation seems still very bad and difficult. At some distance to the east appears another large river, the Columbia, which runs parallel to this to the sea. After obtaining this information, we prevailed upon the Indians to ferry us over to the village. They employed but one canoe which made 3 trips, and took up a considerable time. The village is a fortification of 100 by 24 feet, surrounded with palisades 18 feet high, slanting inwards, and lined with a shorter row that supports a shade covered with bark, and which are the dwellings. This place, we understand, is the metropolis of the Asketti nation. With difficulty we procured a canoe. The Indians, after bargaining a long while, consented to accept of a file and a kettle in exchange, but of provisions we could only procure 30 dried salmon. After so long a stay, I was impatient to be off. I ordered the canoe to be loaded with heaviest packages. Then Mr. Stewart, one of the men, and 2 Indians embarked. But the Indians, finding the canoe overloaded, put the Frenchman ashore and continued with Mr. Stewart. I did not relish this arrangement on account of Mr. Stewart, but he thought nothing of it himself, and merely said he would wait for us within a short distance, or at the foot of the first rapid. The other men had to carry their own things and the ammunition. The last article we considered as too precious to risk out of our sight. As soon as the canoe had doubled the first point and disappeared, we set off, and walked hard to join our friend. We arrived at the place appointed, but the canoe was not there. Alarmed for Mr. Stewart's safety, I continued with augmented speed all along the riverside, followed by a number of natives, and it was after traveling a distance of 10 miles, and coming to an Indian encampment, that I overtook Mr. Stewart. He could not make himself understood by his conductors, and was therefore under the necessity of going on without stopping. About dark, Mr. Quesnel came up with us, and left the men 2 miles behind, encamped. Some of the Indians in this camp we had seen above. The Askettis dress the same as the Atnas. They are civil, but will not part with their provisions without difficulty. They have a variety of roots, some of which taste like potatoes and are excellent. Their bows and arrows are neat. Their mats are made of different materials, such as rushes, grass, watap, etc. With these mats, their shades' shelters are covered. We observe several European articles among them, particularly a new copper tea kettle and a gun of a large size, and which perhaps are of a Russian manufacture. Thursday, June 16th. This morning the men joined us. Of the 2 canoes which the Indians had, we could obtain but one. It belonged to a sick man, who accepted of medicines in payment. Being in bad order, we lost some time in repairing it. Mr. Stewart had a meridian, altitude OLL, 124 degrees 5 feet, artificial, horizon. At 2 we got ready. Mr. Stewart with 2 Indians went in one canoe, 2 men went in the other, and I with the rest went by land. Upon our departure, strangers having arrived at the camp, we were called back. To satisfy their curiosity, we obeyed, shook hands with them, and then resumed our course. About 2 hours after we came up with Mr. Stewart. He waited our arrival to inform us that he had passed through several bad and dangerous rapids on his way from the camp, and that there was a carrying place nearby. Proceeded on to the portage, where we had to carry all for upwards of a mile, and in very bad road. Here we met some of a neighboring nation called Hakamoch, i.e. the Thompson Indians. With these were 2 of another tribe called Swihoni. All were exceedingly well dressed in leather, and were on horseback. They have a great quantity of shells and blue beads, and we saw a broken silver brooch, such as the Sauteux wear, among them. They were kind to us, and assisted us at the carrying place with their horses. We put up at the lower end near their camp. Here we got acquainted with a man of the Chilcotin tribe, who had left his own country when a boy, but still retaining a little of his mother tongue. We made a shift to understand. He observed that he had been at the sea by this communication, where he had seen men like us, who lived in a wooden enclosure upon an island, and who had tents for the purpose of trading with the natives in furs. He gave us a good account of the navigation, and he consented to accompany us as pilot. Since the departure of our Towton interpreters, this was the only man with whom we could converse to any advantage. At this place I saw a shield different from any I had hitherto seen. It was large enough to cover the whole body, composed of splinters of wood, like the ribs of stays, and neatly enclosed with twine made of hemp. An Indian, who had been out a-hunting, returned with a deer he had killed. We applied for a share of the meat, but he would not part with any. The chief invited us to his quarters. His son, by his orders, served us upon a handsome mat and regaled us with salmon and roots. Our men had some also, and they procured, besides, several dogs, which is always a favourite dish with the Canadian voyagers. Friday, June 17th. It was 7 in the morning before we could get ready. Mr. Stewart, 3 men, and an Indian embarked in the canoes. I and the others went as usual by land, but not before I had satisfied the Indians who assisted Mr. Stewart yesterday, the price of whose labour was a knife. In the forenoon we stopped in a camp on the right side of the river. At the same time 16 families of Indians appeared on the opposite bank. The chief to whom we owed the articles of yesterday, and who was then our steersman, asked us to unload in order to ferry these people over with the canoes. We could not well refuse this request, and therefore we obeyed, and thereby lost some time. One of the strangers had a sword of a tremendous size, made of sheet iron. We set off and continued until sunset, when we encamped. Here a great number of Indians were collected from all quarters through curiosity to see us. We found them civil and friendly. In the course of the day, while walking, I observed many piles of sappan near the road, which I took to be tombs. But our young men informed us that they were birthplaces. Hence it seems that this nation honour the birth as well as the death of their friends, with marks of distinction. Saturday, June 18th. It rained all night, and this morning the bad weather, added to the trouble attending a concourse of strange Indians, prolonged our stay to 8 a.m. Here we had an eye upon a canoe, but the Indians, perceiving our design, sent it out of the way. Our interpreter, who promised yesterday to conduct us to the sea, was either sick or pretended to be so. He would not understand a word and wished to remain. We considered him in the main of little consequence, for I had reason to doubt the information which he gave us the day before, our own interpreter having fabricated a little on that occasion. At 3 p.m. we passed a camp of the natives. These were poor, but generous, for they assisted us. Here we observed a tomb with a canoe upside down upon it, and near it a dog hung upon a tree. About sunset we came to a large camp of Indians, where we put up for the night. About the same time Mr. Stewart and his small brigade appeared. Mr. Stewart reported that he had passed several bad and dangerous rapids in the course of the day. Our route also was coarse and fatiguing. The mountains continue to be high and covered with snow. The Indians here are a mixture of Askitis, i.e. the Liloways, and Hackamau, i.e. the Thompson Indians. They gave us a siffileur, i.e. a marmot, which is the first fresh meat we tasted since our departure. Roots are scarce, but the Indians gather a kind of moss, which they make into paste, bake in ovens, and which, though black, is palatable. Sunday, June 19th. Rained last night, and there was a fog in the morning. The Hackamau chief went ahead to prepare the way for us. According to his account, he was the greatest man of his nation. At this place we saw a great number of snails of different colours, and which were the first of that kind that I had seen in the northwest. At 8 a.m. set out, divided as yesterday. A mile below, the natives ferried us over a large rapid river, i.e. the Stein River. I obtained for an awl a passage to the next village, a distance of 3 miles through strong rapids. The others who went by land met some of the Indians on the way who were happy to see them. This was the village of the chief who had left us in the morning. We were told here that the road ahead was very bad, and consequently we should meet with much difficulty for most part of the way. The Indians of this village may be about 400 souls, and some of them appear very old. They live among mountains and enjoy pure air, seem cleanly inclined, and make use of wholesome food. We observed several European articles among them, viz., a copper tea kettle, a brass camp kettle, a strip of common blanket, and clothing such as the Cree women wear. These things, we supposed, were brought from our settlements beyond the mountains. Indeed, the Indians made us understand as much. After having remained some time in this village, the principal chief invited us over the river. We crossed, and he received us at the waterside, where, assisted by several others, he took me by the arms and conducted me in a moment up the hill to the camp, where his people were sitting in rows, to the number of 1,200, and I had to shake hands with all of them. Then the great chief made a long harangue, in course of which he pointed to the sun, to the 4 quarters of the world, and then to us. And then he introduced his father, who was old and blind, and was carried by another man, who also made a harangue of some length. The old blind man was placed near us, and with some emotion often stretched out both his hands in order to feel ours. The Hakamal nation are different both in language and manners from their neighbors, the Asketis. They have many chiefs and great men, appear to be good orators, for their manner of delivery is extremely handsome. We had every reason to be thankful for our reception at this place. The Indians showed us every possible attention and supplied our wants as much as they could. We had salmon, berries, oil, and roots in abundance, and our men had 6 dogs. Our tent was pitched near the camp, and we enjoyed peace and security during our stay, Monday, June 20th. The Indians sung and danced all night. Some of our men who went to see them were much amused. With some difficulty we obtained 2 wooden canoes. The Indians, however, made no price, but accepted of our offers. Shortly after a tumult arose in the camp, I was writing in the tent. Hearing the noise, I went to the door and observed an elderly man running towards me, but he was stopped by some of the others who were making a loud noise. I inquired into the cause. They crowded around me. The chief spoke, and all was quiet. I then learned that Mr. Quesnel, having walked in the direction of a canoe that was at some distance on the beach, the old man in question, who was the owner, thought he was going to lose it. This affray over, we prepared for our departure. The chief pointed out 3 elderly men who were to accompany us to the next nation. In the meantime, I was presented with berries, roots, and oil in abundance. Notwithstanding these tokens of friendship, the impression which the late disturbance made on my mind still remained. However kind savages may appear, I know that it is not in their nature to be sincere in their professions to strangers. The respect and attention which we generally experience proceed, perhaps, from an idea that we are superior beings who are not to be overcome. At any rate, it is certain the less familiar we are with one another, the better for us. I showed to the Indians some trading articles and asked for leather, but none was brought. I gave the chief a large knife and an awl, and he expressed his favor in thanks and affability. I gave also a few trinkets to an Indian of a different nation, in order that he might show them to his friends. These forks, i.e., the junction of the Fraser and the Thompson rivers, the natives call Kamchin, and are formed by a large river, which is the same spoken of so often by our friend the old chief. From an idea that our friends of the Fort des Prairies department are established upon the sources of it, among the mountains, we gave it the name of Thompson's River.